Welcome to Live at 5. It will be Live at 5 at some point in time. I'm Joe Spina, and my co-host, the Honorable Michael Anthony Satterwhite. How are you, Michael?
Happy Tuesday. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, well, actually, you know, we're thinking about going live. Ultimately, we will, folks. And when we go live, fireworks, what can I tell you? Notice, Michael?
You voted.
I did vote.
It's a big day in Salem.
It is a big day in Salem.
Yeah.
And folks, you still have, well, I don't know if it's not live, but if you get this, make sure you get out and vote.
Yeah. And if you didn't vote, plan to vote next time.
I actually got thanked for voting. Would you believe it? I found that nice.
I think that goes a long way. You know, it's my stepmother is doing jury duty today, and she was telling me that she showed up on time, and it was great, you know, to sit there. But then there were people coming in at 10 or 11, well after the cutoff time, and she took insult to it because it's a civic duty that we have, and we should hold gracious to our hearts, because if we're ever in that position, you want to make sure that people show up, right? The same goes with this. We have a duty to not only be on the jury, but we also have a duty to vote, because these are elected officials that are supposed to represent us.
Yeah. And one of the things, you know how many people are on the ballot?
2.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The entire ballot, 2 people.
Yeah.
And the reason why I always vote is because if I want to complain, I better vote.
Yeah, yeah. No, you know, being a politician is one thing, but being someone that's really interested in people is another thing. And I think that that's where I fall into it. So when my mindset is I want to be a voice. You know, I ran for mayor, and my platform was I want to be a voice for you. And when I say that, I mean, like, I delve right into it. I want to know every street. I want to know what that street generates in revenue, and I want to make sure we're putting back that money into that neighborhood.
And it's used wisely.
And it's used wisely.
Exactly.
And that we're not excessively increasing the tax burden on our residential
But Michael, on that
citizens
note,
and whatnot.
you know, I had a slogan many years ago, folks, when I was younger and decided to try my hand at politics. And I paraphrased. I didn't paraphrase. I stole it. Let's be honest about it. I plagiarized it from the good Pope. And it was open the doors and windows at City Hall and let the fresh air in.
Mm.
And I think that is precisely the mindset that I'd like to see happening in politics today.
Yeah. And if you think about, you have Harrington, who was mayor of Salem, and he's had other executive positions throughout government for most of his adult life.
Yeah, he was at Salisbury, right? Town manager, Salisbury.
Yes.
Yeah, folks, I can't tell you or even hint who I voted for, because you can rest assured whoever I voted for is not going to win. I have not picked a winner in 40 years.
That's interesting. But
I actually voted for you for mayor, by the way. I want you to know. I lost with you, too.
I appreciate that. You know, the other candidates knew. He's never been in an elected office before. He had worked for Kim Driscoll, who was a very popular mayor and now lieutenant governor for the state. So, you know, who knows? You have Salem is a very young community, which can go either way if they go out and vote.
Interestingly, and I can say this without any reservation, folks, this is the first time that I voted in Salem in 40 years. When maybe more. I lived on Moffett Road when I first got married, and raising a family before I was plucked by Johnson & Johnson to traverse the Midwest and sell product there. I always had an affinity for Salem, and I must tell you, you know, when I walked in, I didn't know what precinct I was, and I asked. They were very kind. And interestingly, I made a comment about it's a coin flip. And basically it is because, and I meant it in this way, whichever fellow ends up being the mayor, they're both competent. Yeah. They're both going to be able to do the job well. Yeah. It's a matter of style, I guess.
One observed the job being done, which could be a benefit, while the other did the job. And I think that that's what the voters are really considering.
Well, they didn't want change because the individual I voted for in the primary didn't make it to the final. Yeah. So the folks in Salem say, look, we like the way things are, and these are 2 individuals that will probably maintain the status quo.
Yeah. And if we just think about Salem. Salem, I grew up in Lynn mostly, but I was born in Salem.
You were born in Salem.
Yeah. And
Something good about you, Michael.
I spent maybe the first 14 birthdays of my life on Salem Willows at the Black Picnic. Aside from that, the first church I went to when I started going to church was in Salem in the Point, called Rise and Shine. Salem has a lot of positive things going for it, and I hope the next mayor realizes that and continues to expand and work with residents throughout the city for every community, because it's so vital to have a relationship and
Let
a
me
connection.
give you a little aside. As where I live now, I live in 45 Traders Way. Actually, French Street comes down, so I bypass to get onto Highland Avenue. And as I'm trying to get onto Highland Avenue, you have to watch for the traffic coming down. And so I made a point to go onto the bike lane, to get to the right side, so in case anybody was coming a little too quickly, I wouldn't be at Salem Hospital. And I drove there for a little bit until it was safe enough to move into the normal lane. And as we got to the lights down at the bottom of the hill, a police cruiser pulled up next to me, a parallel, rolled down his window. He said, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, you were in the bike lane." And he didn't mean that negatively, he meant that positively. And I said to myself, that's a nice gesture. People have the wrong attitude about policemen sometimes. So I want to say publicly, folks, I don't know who that young man was, and he was a young man. So you think about that individual who was driving down Highland Avenue around 3 o'clock on May 16th, and if you know who he is, tell him that Joe Spina, the host of Live at 5, along with his co-host Michael Anthony Satterwhite, who you spent a career, you're an attorney. You deal with the police all of the time.
I do.
They're not bad guys.
No, I say this often. There's a few that ruin it for the many, and it's unfortunate. I know a lot of good police officers. We talked about this before. My dear officer, and when I was in elementary school, how she reached out to you, and she cares so much about me to this day, and it's amazing. And my dad has cop friends, John White and Lynn, the Magners, the O'Tools, and so on and so on. At my wedding, I had several police officers. So,
Is my phone ringing again?
Yeah. So, again, there's a few that ruin it for the many, and it's unfortunate.
But that's in any no matter what enterprise you're talking about, it's
a
human
lawyer.
thing. Right.
Exactly. People automatically assume that we're all ambulance chasers or that we're unethical.
No, I don't.
So you're right. And there are, what we're doing right now, we're hosting a show. There are some people that think that host, just because there are two bad hosts that probably spew things that aren't accurate, make it bad for all of us. But I think you say it often. Truth is our mission, right? Reality our realm, and we see it as we see it.
Well, that's just that. What we're trying to do is find a sweet spot. The last show we did with Michael Mahoney.
It was a great show.
Michael Mahoney, who's an attorney,
Yes.
who has a life story to tell, and what he overcame. I mean, it's an inspiration.
Yeah.
And he and I are politically and socially diametrically opposed. Yet we're friendly. You and I don't always agree on stuff. You know what people fail to realize? Everything's a Venn diagram. There's an intersection point. So if you compare and contrast apples and oranges, both of them are fruits. They intersect at fruitness, right?
Yeah.
Don't you and I intersect as human beings?
But not only that, it's a different taste as well. And that's how it is. We have a different acquired taste, if you want to say.
No question.
And that's fine, because the more we talk about it, you might not have tried it enough, or I've always just stayed away from it. Like seafood. Like I tell my wife, "Oh, I don't like seafood." Then she'll make me something and then tell me it's seafood.
Yeah.
And I'll eat it all. So sometimes we have something in our mind that we're stuck on because it's all we know. And you've talked about this often. Did you know you were poor growing up? No, that's all I knew. All I knew was that's all I knew. I didn't know what wealth was.
Well, when we go live, I want to interact with the people because I would rather talk to them about what's important in their life than me trying to tell them what's important in their life.
Yeah.
And that's how you learn. One of the things I always liked, I'm throwing a bouquet at Michael Anthony, I always liked about you is that you were always willing to listen to people. You're not locked in. You have your preferences, but you're not locked in. If someone comes up with a better mousetrap, Michael Anthony says, "You know what? I think I'm going to buy that."
And so I'm a mediator conciliator. And I volunteer in the courthouses around the North Shore. And I was just there on Friday in Lynn. And so any case where there's two parties, they send them to me, and I'll try to resolve it between them where there's not a judge or a magistrate.
Yeah.
Every single one settled, all 6 of the cases. And the clerk was obviously ecstatic because he didn't have to hear any trials. But I did it, and I had another clerk observe me. And today he came up to me and he was like, Michael, you're patient and you listen. Some people just want to be heard. And those are the 2 things that you do, which is why your cases that go to mediation always resolve. I have a 95% success rate as a mediator.
For listening.
For cases.
Yeah.
So I do.
Because you listen.
Yeah. Summary process, which is evictions, and that's a very heightened thing. You're talking about someone's livelihood, someone's household. To mediate those, and then you have small claims and civil cases. It takes time to listen, and I might come in with a mindset of what I know, and then the 2 people come up with a resolution that fits what they want, what they need. And I'm not going to say, oh, I don't agree with that. I have to go along with it as a mediator. And that's when you learn, like, hey, let me listen, see how far apart you are, throw out some suggestions, but ultimately you have to be comfortable with the decision you make. And that's how I operate in life. It's important.
You were very active in a fellow Salemite who's now the district attorney. Paul Tucker, you did a lot of hard work for him. He's a former chief of police, by the way, so I'll give him credit for training that policeman at least. I don't know if he was chief at that time, but apparently the Salem Police Department has some nice protocols in place. So how's he doing, by the way?
He's great. I met with him a couple weeks ago. He gave me a tour of the penthouse suite on Federal Street. It was great, and we sat down and we talked, and it was some of the cases that had just recently come out in his first month or 2. One of them was that father in Andover who killed his wife and son, and I don't know how you can get that call as a DA, and then wake up and then have to go to the house to make a statement. It's a lot, and he's had some high-profile cases recently, and it's amazing how transparent he is with the community and how often he's speaking directly to them, and that was needed for the next district attorney.
Well, when we interviewed him when he was running for office at the Lynn Water Cable, we had a great response, by the way, from the audience when he came on. I mentioned my affinity for Dirty Harry, and he took issue with that.
He did. He was honest about it, and you could see it in his face.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, a turning point for people to see, because in my community, in the African urban-based type community, they had issue with the fact that he was a police officer for so long and a captain, and a chief actually, and they thought that his mindset was going to be punish, punish, punish. But when you put his record as a state rep up against what he did as the chief of police and what he did as a chief of police, he changed a lot of policies and procedures. He brought up people of color and through the ranks. All those things are important, and his record spoke for itself at the end, and he's showing up the way he should show up as district attorney.
So you're saying he's a pragmatic law enforcement individual. He's going to go after those cases. You mentioned a tough case. He will prosecute those tough cases.
Yes.
He's not going to put them down to misdemeanors.
Correct.
He's not going to take misdemeanors and elevate them.
Correct.
He's going to look at the law as it should be intended. I want to move to a topic, and this is more of a national topic, but I think it certainly affects Lynn, and I suspect it's going to affect Salem. How? I'm not quite sure, but and you're an attorney, so you understand this stuff. And plus, you're an immigration attorney.
You're going to talk about Title 42?
I am going to talk about the expiration of. First of all, the fanfare was that we were going to get stormed. It doesn't seem to happen. It's a storm that didn't happen. Am I accurate on that?
That's 100% accurate. The numbers of people crossing the borders are not what they expected.
Okay, that's the good news. Mm-hmm. Now, either way, whenever you have the movement of people, Don't forget, my folks came to this country from a different country.
Or bad news, people might not think that we're in good economic shape for them to come here to have a better future.
Well, we're not, Michael.
Well, yeah, you're right. We have the debt limit we need to talk about and all that other stuff. So those are things that could be deterrent.
That's an interesting point, Michael. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, so they're saying, wait, hold it. Why are we going to a place that may not be that good to start with, right? Good point. See, what happens, and the only reason why I want to bring it up is because Salem is a welcoming city.
It is.
Like Lynn. And so you would find that a number of folks who would have come over the Rio Grande would somehow have ended up in Salem, whatever that number may have been. But it would have impacted city services, for sure.
So 100%, and I'll tell you why, okay? So if someone comes over the border and they're seeking asylum, they'll be processed, and then typically they are handed over to someone that is a relative or someone that can take care of them while they're here. They'll have a court date, and if needed, I don't think they have enough bracelets to monitor them, but that's typically the standard. So Salem has a huge Hispanic population.
On the Point, they call it the Point, right?
Not just the Point, throughout the city, but the Point is predominantly Hispanic, yes. Right. Lynn has a huge immigrant Hispanic community.
You know, by the way, speaking of that, do you know what, and you were on the school committee.
Yeah.
Let me throw a trick question at you. I didn't realize this. I noted in the paper the other day, you know what the percentage of Hispanic Latinos in the Lynn school system is?
It was hovering around 70%.
Exactly. You know what you're talking about, Michael.
Numbers.
So that makes the point. That makes the point. That really underlines it. But keep going. I'm sorry.
So yeah, of course they're going to head towards where they have relatives or someone that can house them, because otherwise they're going to be in the possession of the USCIS.
Michael, my father came to Lynn because his older brother was in Lynn, because his other brother was in Lynn, and his other brother was in Lynn.
And that's how immigration is still happening. So yes, that happens. They come here, and they don't have the ability to work, so that's why they're reliant on these relatives to support them while they're here.
Well, interestingly, there were different protocols, and folks better understand this. Things have changed. Some stuff we should revisit. Yeah. For example...
But let me just explain one thing. To seek asylum, you have to go through an entry point. You can't illegally cross the border. So if you illegally cross the border and you're not processed at an entry point, asylum is a very high bar to try to obtain. So we have laws in place to make sure we know who's coming into our country. And if they don't, they get punished. You're barred from entering the country, if you're caught, for 10 years, sometimes even longer.
Yeah, those are the rules, but that's not the reality.
But again, people want to have the lawful ability to live here, to work here, to make money here. And it hinders that ability if they don't do it the right way.
I can speak to immigration because I happen to be the product of it. Both my parents came at Ellis Island, point of entry you're talking about.
Yeah.
Neither one of them would be allowed to get off that ship unless they had a complete physical and were deemed healthy. And they had to have a sponsor. So someone like an underwriter. So if they didn't have a job, they had someone to take care of it, that it would not become a burden on the state. That was then. This is not the case anymore.
No, so in order to get your green card, you have to have a physical. Yeah,
but see, you're talking about legal. What's happening, our problem is illegal immigration. It's not the legals. I have no problem. Even the legals don't like, I mean, if you were to talk to the folks at the Point in Salem or in El Paso, Texas, and they want folks coming in the way they came in, legally.
But let me explain. The ones that are coming here illegally are in grave danger. They come with mules that have their families still in their home country, and if they don't pay them the extorted amount of money that they charge them to bring them here, it's huge, okay? No, but aside from that, we'll talk about the federal government and how immigration works here, okay? So then on the other side, the federal government, $1,760 for the application fee for a green card. Then you have to pay an attorney who's probably going to charge you $10,000. So you have that cost before you can even work legally.
That's for legal, Michael.
But
the illegals don't pay 2 nickels.
Both ways, there's monetary issues.
Of course there is.
And that's what we feel to recognize. So say you come illegally and you want to become legal. unless you're on TPS and there's certain ways you can get around it, there's no way you can. You have to leave and either be barred for the 10 years
Michael,
period.
let me
but
ask you,
if you're married to a U.S. citizen, then they can waive that and you can come back in.
Here's what troubles me. Now, the governor of Texas, as you well know,
Abbott.
and the governor of Florida, as you well know, both of those governors, I suspect it would have happened in Arizona, except that that governor was not the one that was intended, you know, from my side of the coin. They now ship their migrants, that's the new word they use, migrants to New York, Chicago, and they're going bonkers in New York and Chicago. They're saying, oh, no, we don't. I mean, these are supposedly welcoming cities, and they're not welcoming them at all. They're complaining and copping about it because it affects the city. In fact, in New York, my understanding is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that here you have a bunch of veterans who unfortunately had a bad time with things, and they're homeless, and they've been put up at hotels, and they're being evicted from the hotel to make room for migrants who aren't even citizens. Is that accurate, or is that hype?
I didn't hear that.
Is that hype?
I don't know.
I don't either.
What I do want to say is immigration is a federal issue. It needs to be addressed.
But it affects us locally.
I understand that. It affects us all the way down. So the issue I have is that they collect billions, trillions in fees, and yet it goes to the general fund. That money needs to be reallocated so it could help these towns, these cities, these states that are taking them in.
So you're saying that the money that the federal government accrues from the fees, et cetera, should be allocated to take the pressure, economic pressure off of Salem, Lynn, and places like that?
Of course, it's important. I did research, so I'm running for Ward 1 councilor in Lynn.
Yeah.
And every street I knock, if I don't meet you, I send you a letter afterwards. In that letter, I'll tell you how much your street generates in property taxes for the city. And the question is, do you even get 10% of that back for improvements or for activities for this one street? And the answer is always no.
Michael, you speak eloquently, have spoken eloquently on other shows about how we're disproportionate in the city of Lynn, that it's a 90-10 split between homeowners versus commercial.
Yeah.
Explain that to the folks, because this affects Salem too.
Well, yeah. Any counselor that represents you, their job should not be, how can I get more money out of this particular person? As your counselor, they should look at your ward and say, how can I get money back into my community? Because this is how much they're putting out. And that is where you fight at the budget process of things. That's where you look at, well, you want to add new tax revenues.
Right, where they go allocated, yeah.
Not just who's it being increased by. That's what's called, being equitable, right?
And it's also best practices that you always talk about.
Of course, it's best practices. It's so important for the ward council to know what their job is. Their job is not to sit there and get a paycheck. Their job there is to represent the residents that live in their city or in their ward. And by doing so, making sure that they're not overly burdening them with things that is not necessary, okay? It's so important for that. And that might be holding the mayor accountable. And you do that by looking at the budget that's being presented to you, and you see where that money's being allocated. You see what new positions are being created. Are they all
whether
top-heavy?
Whether it's Lynn or Salem or wherever.
Yeah. Are they all top-heavy, or are they direct service positions? Because people want that.
Yeah.
It's so important.
By the way, this just popped into my head out of nowhere. As I began the show, and I mentioned I went into that bicycle lane in order to, and I spoke to, we have a terrific kid here, you know, who puts our show together. I didn't realize, and you're an attorney, so you can tell me, is it illegal for me to drive in a bike lane?
Of course.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you cannot. So sometimes the bike lanes will kind of cut into the right turn.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can be there, but you're not supposed to block it. Just like a bus lane. So I take the Tobin in quite often, and there are 3 lanes, but 1 lane is exclusively for the bus. And I see people driving down that lane like it's a speed lane, and they get pulled over all the time because there's a cop down the lane.
That should be known. I think they better advertise these points, because some of this planning of bike lanes and stuff, although it's well intended, is going to cause a lot of problems.
You know what it sounds like your suggestion is that just like in any profession or any license that you have, that there's continued education required. So whenever they change laws, you should be required to take a course to better understand them, because things are changing, and that could be a good thing to keep people privy to it.
We did a show, you were tied up in Boston, I think I talked about it last week, that had to do with a right turn on red lights. And there are those who want to ban it because people are just flying through it without any regard. I mean, it makes sense to get traffic flowing, but now it becomes a collision, the thing we were talking about what about a pedestrian walking, someone just flies through there,
I love it, because I've done a ton of research on this, because we have a lot of issues in Lynn with intersections, very dangerous intersections. Same thing in Salem. And you have to be creative. Things can't just be the same forever, because technology is changing, right? And more people might be walking or relying on public transportation. If that's taking place, you need to reconfigure your roads to fit the need of the community. And that also keeps you on top of maintenance. Some of our roads in Salem have potholes. It's just not fair to the community. So it keeps them honest, where they're continually looking at the patterns, looking at ways to decrease traffic speeds if they're too high in residential areas. There's ways to avoid pedestrian accidents. You have a rotary down that one street, if you go the back way to your house, right?
Yes.
That was not always there. That was a straight street before. And then they added that rotary. That was to slow down the speed.
Talking about Fernwood?
You know where the gym is? I think it's the Salem Sports Club. It's right.
Yeah, okay.
So that's all done, hopefully by a developer within the city, but it needs to be looked at in every neighborhood. It just can't be one and done.
You have, look, you're right about the new dynamics. When I was growing up, if a family had one car, they were fortunate.
Yeah.
Today, I go to my kid's house, and
There's 4 or
everybody
5
in that
cars.
house has a car.
No, it's very, very strange, because the car is a huge purchase, and not everyone can afford it. So a family of 4 with 4 cars, you're very lucky. But that's obviously substantial added cost. Insurance,
You know what the average cost of an automobile is today, Michael? I couldn't believe it. Take a wild guess.
Used or new?
No, brand new.
Brand new? $25,000.
How about 48?
Whoa.
The average cost of a car today is $48,000. Not only is it $48,000, it's gone up 20% since last year.
Wow.
Okay, it's amazing.
Substantial.
And what they were trying to say is, we like to talk about affordability, affordable housing, affordable this. If automobiles are costly, if electricity is going off the charts, that's an issue for you and Lynn. You better have Lynn do, and we only got a couple of minutes, do what Salem does, which is have some type of co-op for electricity.
I saw that, and I love that you speak about that so people can understand. And I did research for the city, and there's similar programs, but they're not being pushed by the city. So good luck to the 2 mayoral candidates. That putting yourself out there, putting yourself on the ballot is a big deal. Not only that, you're putting yourself out there. It's a vulnerable position. So I just want to thank you both for running a race. I didn't see any dirty politics either.
No.
And that was great. Yeah.
Get out and vote. Michael, see you next week.
I'll see you. Have a good one. Thank you.